I'm pleased to be joined by Edward-Isaac Dovere, the editor of two publications, City Hall and The Capitol, covering city and state politics and government. Isaac, welcome to CityWide.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Insiders in The Capitol, in City Hall, are familiar with your publication. It's not a general circulation newspaper. Tell us about what you do.
Well, City Hall is a publication for the people who are working professionally within government or around government. We see our audience as really being the elected officials in New York and the people who work with them and for them and around them. We also have the Capitol, which is more Albany focused, and that's for the government and political community that's focused on state government.
So it's sort of like the Wall Street Journal, but just for local politics.
Right.
So January 1st, 2008, I woke up pretty sure that Hillary Clinton was going to be the Democratic nominee for president, with the strong support of Governor Eliot Spitzer, that the Wall Street boom was carrying Mayor Bloomberg out of office as a result of term limits on a cloud of goodwill. Did that particle accelerator in Switzerland push me into an alternative universe?
Well, I think what I can say with all justification is that it's been a very good year to be a political reporter in New York. It's been a year that just keeps on giving. Nobody could have predicted really any of the stories that you mentioned, and a lot of the smaller ones along the way. What you left out of that is that the state Senate switched hands on Election Day, and that was a story that was sort of rolling out over the course of the year. It's been forgotten about now, but even 2 weeks before Eliot Spitzer's surprise resignation, I guess we'll call it, there had been a state Senate race, a special election upstate, in a place that hadn't been represented by a Republican for decades, that went to a Democrat. And that was the amazing story at the time. Back in February, that's all anybody could talk about. It seems kind of silly now, after all of the things that have happened, that was ever a big story. But it's just every month, every week, there's been something that's just totally changed the game, both in the city and state. And I think that's going to continue over the months ahead.
Is the Republican Party over in New York?
Well, in New York City, the Republican Party has been in a lot of trouble for a lot of years. And though Mike Bloomberg was elected as a Republican both times so far, and it's not clear whether he'll run as a Republican next year, he never was a true Republican. And I think everybody, Democrat and Republican, knew that. Even Rudy Giuliani was much more of a Republican than Mike Bloomberg. And when he was mayor, before he was running for president, there were a lot of people in the Republican Party who had some trouble with him. In the state, the Republican Party is alive. It's not alive and well. I think that they're in big trouble. And the question is whether they can do anything to fight back the demographics and districts that have been changing under the state senators and elected officials. And now that the majorities are in the hands of the Democrats, whether they'll ever be able to convince people to go back.
I've heard it suggested that the Republican Party became transactional, in the sense that it would cater to its major contributors, including some of the big unions, 1199 in particular, and that in difficult economic times, when a Republican message of smaller government, lower taxes might resonate, they are paralyzed, because that means turning on the very people who have propped them up. And as their power shrinks, their ability to engage in transactions becomes so much smaller, so that they really have nothing else to offer.
I think to some extent that's true, that happened. The other thing that really created a lot of problems for the Republicans in the state Senate is that there was never an emphasis on recruiting. In the last 15 years, only a few new Republican younger candidates had emerged to run for offices. You can't sustain a party long term doing that. Two of the candidates who lost this year, the two who were the seats that gave the majority to the Democrats, were old men who had been there for a long time.
But isn't that partially a function that that George Pataki and Rudy Giuliani blocked out the sun. The way for younger talent to emerge is by taking on the status quo, but when the status quo is your own party for such a long period of time, it doesn't really, the Democrats had the same thing with Koch and Cuomo.
I think that's part of it, but there was also not a huge interest, it seems, from George Pataki in really getting down and building Republican farm teams on the city council level, all over the state, on the town council level, so that then there would be candidates that would naturally rise up and start moving towards things. In Suffolk County, you had a man, Cesar Trunzo, who's 82 years old, who hadn't spoken on the floor of the Senate in 2 years, and didn't really campaign, in part because his age restricted him from doing a heavy campaign, and he had a very energetic opponent in Brian Foley. The district had sort of changed to be more Democratic while Trunzo had been senator, and there wasn't anyone clear who would be a successor to Trunzo in the Republican Party. That's why that district went to the Democrats in large part. There wasn't a new candidate, there wasn't, the demographics changed, and there wasn't a strong message for the candidate to be carrying. It goes back to what you were saying at the beginning. You
cover Mayor Bloomberg up close, follow the activities of his office, his commissioners, more closely than even the daily papers. Why does he want to be mayor again?
I think he feels, there are a number of different answers to this, and they range from the most optimistic to the most cynical. He seems to believe that there isn't anyone who could better handle the economic situation that we're in than he could. And I think it's important that what he's talking about is not that the stock market has been having trouble in the past couple of months, but that the long-term effect of this in the city budget, when there's just less money, there are less jobs, there are more people in need, is going to reverberate for years to come. And he sees his expertise in fixing that and in dealing with that and in managing the budget in a way that will actually make sense. There was a feeling back in for months, and back in April, I wrote a story for our publication about how the people looking at the Democratic field, and it was anticipated at that point it would be Christine Quinn, Anthony Weiner, and Bill Thompson, were not getting anybody really excited, and that there was a feeling that there needed to be someone else. Isn't there someone else?
But isn't that always the case, particularly this far out from an election? In other words, they're not getting covered as candidates. They're not acting like candidates. They're a lot of the work that they do is below the radar screen in terms of raising money and building organizational support. So isn't it true that in every significant election, I can remember in the Democratic field they were talking the seven dwarfs, or the mayoral election, or people just don't, and it's only when you get closer, people are paying attention and the media spotlight is on that people seem to rise up and achieve stature.
I think that's part of it, obviously. I think in these weeks we're now getting used to the idea that Barack Obama is going to be the president after watching this man campaign for the office for 2 years in very high-profile circumstances. So certainly people don't look like real holders of the office they're running for until maybe they're already in it. But a large part of it, I think, also is that Mike Bloomberg is extremely popular, even in the midst of the hubbub about changing term limits. His popularity remained in the 70% range. I think everybody can agree that he's been at least a reasonably good mayor, if not a very good mayor, and has redefined a lot of the way that the job was done from his predecessors, and gotten rid of some of the things that people just thought was ridiculous that mayors got involved in. He hasn't been perfect. There's a lot to criticize about his record, but the feeling that he has been so good that to look at these other people and say, could anybody be that good? Is there?
Give me some specifics, because the things that you say, that the ridiculous things that he got away from. It's sure that he doesn't get into verbal jousting with people, right, as much as other mayors do. But rate of spending exceeded inflation, yep, although they put money away for bad times. Major initiatives, congestion pricing, the West Side Stadium stalled. So what are the major accomplishments of Bloomberg as you see it?
Well, the major accomplishment is that the city is being run well.
What does that mean?
Right. What does that mean? It means that the crime rate has remained low. There is question whether some of those statistics have been played with a little bit, but it seems that for the most part the city has remained a safe place. Development was at a breakneck pace in New York. That's a good thing on the one hand. Of course, that pushes people out of their homes and limits the affordable housing.
And was that a function of something
stock.
that Bloomberg did, or is it merely government getting out of the way of the market?
Well, I mean, it's one is part of the other. I mean, Bloomberg has really encouraged a lot of big development in the city. They, on Thursday, will vote for the Willets Point plan, which is something the administration is very heavily behind. That's not something that's going to kick out a lot of residents. It will kick out a lot of small business owners from where they are. And there has been the sort of key Bloomberg approach to government is looking at the big picture and not getting worried about the smaller elements and the individual people as much. That, again, can be a very good thing for how the city goes, but it means that people don't have homes that they can afford sometimes, that they don't have schools that they can feel like they're very comfortable in. The mayoral control of schools is in some respects a very big success of Mike Bloomberg, but there are a lot of people who have a lot of complaints about it and say that their students' individual, or their children or their students' individual concerns aren't being met.
Their schools haven't benefited
right.
from it.
And that this push to get everything into one system, which has since changed to a different system, sort of, has left a lot of people out in the cold. And so when you look at Bloomberg, what you don't see is some one thing that everybody can just rail on, but you look at sort of chinks in the armor and stories that are not as perfect as the administration sometimes likes it.
My hoarseness, I assure you, it's not entirely a result of all the cheering over the election. We'll continue our discussion of the Bloomberg legacy and politics in New York City and state when CityWide continues right after this.
Everyone has friends. There's online friends, friends to go out with on a Saturday night, friends to hang out with and do nothing, friends who show up on moving day. And then there are the friends who'll be there if someone is dealing with a mental illness. Are you one of those friends?
Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with Edward-Isaac Dovere, the editor of two publications, City Hall and The Capitol. We're talking about Bloomberg, education, mayoral control. Governor Patterson hasn't weighed in on this, but education is an issue that was always important to him, particularly given the constituency he represented in Harlem and Upper Manhattan. Change of the legislature, although as we sit here, we don't know exactly who's going to be leading the legislature. We just know that a majority of the members are enrolled in the Democratic Party. What is the and we also don't know whether Joel Klein is going to be continuing as chancellor or not.
Yes.
Some talk of him going to Washington in some capacity. What is the likely outcome of the mayoral control renewal?
Well, first of all, I think, though, as you pointed out, we don't know exactly who the leader of the state Senate is going to be. I think most people are starting to come around to the idea that the Democrats will indeed keep the majority that they seem to have won on Election Day. There's this question of whether 4 state senators would maybe back the Republicans, and with a small margin that would switch the control back to the Republican Party. But it seems unlikely that that will materialize, but you never know in politics.
Right, not this year.
But as far as what will happen with mayoral control, there's a feeling in a lot of quarters that it's been a good thing. And so I think what the most likely outcome will be is that mayoral control will be renewed, but will be renewed with some changes. Of course, the mayor has made it clear that he doesn't think it needs to have major changes, but what I think you're likely to see from the Democratic majority in the legislature is a push to get more parent involvement, to have less of the decisions being made just totally top down, and more of it being fed from the students' parents and the students' teachers, those who are in the schools.
Is there any empirical evidence that that's a good idea?
Well, I think this is one of those cases where it's not clear exactly how many cooks it will take to spoil the stew. So the question is how many different review panels and how many different places are they going to need to go through to get anything done. Again, this goes back to what I was sort of saying earlier. Mike Bloomberg takes the approach of seeing things from the top down and not really looking at those individual stories and individual cases and sort of seeing it as the whole system. But that creates a lot of problems.
Education polls very well as an issue that voters are concerned about, but when you drill down in those results as to what it is that voters actually are looking for, it's not clear whether it's parental involvement or class size or whatever. There are constituencies for vouchers and charter schools. So there doesn't seem to be a clear ideology, if you will, emerging from the voters. So let me ask you this question. Is education the issue that could allow Bill Thompson to separate himself from the other Democratic contenders for mayor and for leadership? He is the former president of the City Board of Education. He is the only one of the leading Democratic candidates who is a parent of a kid who went to the public schools. And is that the issue, particularly since he's an African-American leader and the school population is overwhelmingly children of color, does that give him a platform to fill that stature gap with Mike Bloomberg?
I think it would certainly be part of a platform. As you point out, he has the credentials in personal and professional background to make the case that he has an understanding of the educational system that others don't. He would be very strong on some of those credentials. On the other hand, he was the president of the Board of Education which no longer exists because a lot of people agreed that mayoral control was better.
Including him.
Right. And so saying that he has a great deal of expertise because of some body because he worked as the head of a body that doesn't exist anymore and that people thought needed to be gotten rid of is a kind of tough argument to make. He has other things that would potentially make him a strong candidate. I think being able to put the record forward as a fiscal manager, that's obviously what Bloomberg is going to try to do. Thompson is the comptroller of the city, and even though Mike Bloomberg has a strong business background and has overseen the budgets as mayor, he could potentially be weak or at least matched in some respect by a comptroller of the city, especially a comptroller who always tends to speak not in the larger picture, but always talks about the forgotten people, which I think would be very powerful going into a year when we can't forget that Barack Obama will become the president at the beginning of the year that this mayoral election will happen in, that there will be a lot of very pro-democratic feeling in a lot of places in New York City among them.
So take the best case scenario for Thompson. Take the best case scenario for Anthony Weiner. He has matured. He is extremely hardworking, intelligent, articulate. He is able to put forth that democratic core message as well as anybody on the political scene. Can either one of them beat Bloomberg?
Yes, but it won't be easy by any stretch of the imagination. It's never easy to beat an incumbent. It doesn't matter who that incumbent is. When you've got a two-term mayor, it's even harder. When you've got a two-term mayor who's got a 70% approval rating, it's even harder. When you've got a person like that who has an essentially unlimited amount of money to spend, it becomes a really difficult thing. And it would really take somebody shooting the moon and getting lucky in a couple of circumstances and having there be a lot of dissatisfaction grow in the city that would make...
And even with all of that, there's still all that money.
And even with it, right. And it's important to note that Mike Bloomberg spent more money, twice as much money running for mayor the first time as Ross Perot did running for president in 1992. That's a lot of money, and so he spent an average of about $80 million on each of the campaigns. He has said, or his aides have said, that $100 million is a number that they feel comfortable with, and maybe more going into the 2009 election. You can buy a lot of goodwill with that amount of money.
I want to talk a little bit about race in these races. It is remarkable to me how unremarkable race has become in the political discourse. It was certainly historic for David Paterson to become the first African-American governor in the state, but since then, nobody really talks about it. Malcolm Smith's ascendancy in the New York State Senate, more significant because he's a Democrat than because he is black in a body that is overwhelmingly white. Are we in a post-racial society now, or is it just that people aren't talking about it?
I think we're in a post-people talking about it as much society. We would be foolish to believe that race is gone as an issue in America. I think a lot of it has to do, honestly, by having a guy who ran for president who was black for 2 years and really got people thinking about this, but throughout never talked about himself as the black candidate, as the candidate of the black community. He gave one, I think, universally acknowledged pretty good speech, if not excellent speech, about race when he was forced to because of the Jeremiah Wright scandal. But that's helped put some of the racial identity questions and the racial issues a little bit further on the back burner. But again, this is New York. I don't think that race was ever as big a factor here as it was in let's say, Alabama.
Well, I'm not sure that was true in the 80s and 90s, and one would argue that race pushed Ed Koch out of office his last term. Race certainly played a factor in David Dinkins' win and David Dinkins' loss to Rudy Giuliani.
That's true. There's no question about that. I think what can be said about Bloomberg's legacy so far is that he's done a good job of cooling the racial fires, and I think that helps too. There are a lot of factors that go into this, but also David Paterson, though he is the son of a leader of the Harlem political establishment and represented Harlem for over 20 years in the state Senate, he himself rarely talks about himself as a black candidate, as a black politician, as a racial politician. The conversation is driven by the way that some of the people themselves talk about themselves.
My thanks to Edward-Isaac Dovere, the editor of City Hall and the Capitol, covering city and state politics and government. I'm Ken Fisher. Thank you for joining us on this edition of CityWide.